It happened on a warm Tuesday morning at Westwood Middle School. The kind of morning where everything felt ordinary and predictable. Students dragged their backpacks across the hallway floors, laughing loudly, trading snacks, and talking about nothing in particular. No one expected anything special to happen, and certainly no one expected a quiet boy named Evan to become part of a joke that would flip his whole world upside down. Evan usually sat near the back of the room, close to the window. He wasn't the type to push himself into conversations or draw attention. Most days he kept to himself, sketching in the corner of his notebook or listening to whatever music playlist he had saved on his old phone. He wasn't invisible. Exactly, people knew he was there, but he didn't stand out either. He wasn't loud, he wasn't popular, and he definitely wasn't the kind of student who signed up for school events, especially not the annual talent show. But that morning, as he walked into homeroom, he sensed something strange. A small group of students huddled near the front desk, whispering and laughing. Their bodies were leaned forward like they were guarding some kind of secret. When they noticed Evan walking in, the whispering turned into muffled giggles. Evan felt his stomach tighten. He tried to ignore it and went straight to his seat. He opened his notebook, staring at a blank page, pretending it held something important. The teacher hadn't arrived yet, and the room buzzed with the usual restless energy. Then one of the boys who often found humor in making fun of shy kids turned toward the class and loudly announced, "The talent show list is going up today. Make sure you check it out. Some people signed up for some pretty interesting things." Everyone laughed, and Evan didn't understand why. Not yet a few minutes later, when the bell rang, the students rushed out of the room like a wave. Evan packed his things slowly, hoping to avoid the crowd. He stepped into the hallway and noticed a crowd gathered around the bulletin board. It was the list. The talent show sign-up sheet. Evan froze. He didn't want to go near it. Crowds made him nervous, but then he heard it. "I have to see it. Look at the third name. No way, is that for real? Who put that?" Another student said through laughter. Evan felt a cold drop of dread run down his back. A small part of him already knew. Against his better judgment, he moved closer. Students parted just enough for him to squeeze in and get a look. There it was. His name, written clearly, and next to it the words, "Piano Prodigy Performance." Evan blinked several times, thinking maybe he was seeing it wrong. But it stayed there, plain as day, in dark ink. He could feel his ears burning. Someone behind him snickered. Someone else said, "I didn't know he could even play." Followed by more laughter. Evan felt small, very small. He wanted to disappear into the floor or melt into the wall, anything to escape the eyes staring at him. He didn't know who wrote his name down, but he knew it wasn't him. He would never have done that. He tried to step back from the crowd, but people kept looking at him. Some of them tried to hide their smiles. Others didn't bother. "It's probably just a joke," someone whispered. "Obviously," another said. Evan turned around and hurried down the hallway, trying not to let the rising heat in his face turn into tears. He kept his head low, taking long steps until he reached his next class. He sat down and stared at his desk, his mind spinning. A joke. He didn't like being the center of attention, especially not for something he never signed up for. But how was he supposed to fix it? Tell the teachers? Confront the kids who did it? Both options made his chest tighten. At lunchtime, he walked into the cafeteria, hoping no one would bring it up. He chose a small table near the wall, where he usually sat alone. He placed his lunch tray down quietly and tried to eat, but every bite felt dry, like sand. A few minutes later, 2 kids passed by his table. They weren't being mean, but they were definitely amused. "Hey, Evan," one of them said, smiling a little too brightly. "Didn't know you were? Like, amazing at piano." Other laughed. "Yeah, we're looking forward to the show." They kept walking, still laughing lightly. Evan lowered his head again. He could play piano, but not the way they thought. Not amazingly, he wasn't trained. He didn't take lessons. He wasn't some stage performer who could wow an entire auditorium. He just liked music. He played at home because it made him feel calm. But no one knew that. It was his private thing. Something inside him twisted painfully. Because now, everyone at school thought he was a joke. When lunch ended, he walked to the music room, He didn't have class there that day, but he needed a quiet place to breathe. The door was open, and the music teacher, Mrs. Lane, was stacking sheet music on her desk. She looked up with a warm smile. "Evan, everything all right?" "You look a little pale." Evan hesitated. "There's a misunderstanding," he said quietly. "Someone put my name on the talent show list." "Oh yes," she said gently. "I saw that. You're signed up for piano, right?" He almost flinched. "I didn't do it. Someone else wrote my name." As a joke, Mrs. Lane's expression softened. She didn't laugh. She didn't tell him to ignore it. She didn't brush it off like something silly. Instead, she walked closer, her voice calm. "Do you play at all? Even just a little?" Evan stared at the floor, sort of. "But not for people, sometimes," she said. "The things we think we should hide are the things that surprise others the most." He didn't know how to respond to that. Mrs. Lane nodded toward the piano in the corner of the room. It was an older instrument, the wood fading from years of use. "Why don't you try a few notes? Just for me. Just to see how comfortable you are." Evan swallowed hard. He didn't want anyone to hear him play not when he wasn't prepared. But Mrs. Lane wasn't pushing him. She waited quietly, giving him space. After a long moment, he walked toward the piano. He sat on the bench, his hands resting on his knees. He could feel his heartbeat in his fingertips. Slowly, he placed his fingers on the keys. He tried a simple chord. Mrs. Lane's smile didn't fade. "Take your time," she said softly. So he did. He played a few notes. Then a few more. The sounds were soft and shaky, like his hands weren't sure what they were supposed to do. "Good," she said, encouraging him. He took a breath and played a short melody he remembered from a video he once watched. It wasn't perfect. He made mistakes. His fingers stumbled once or twice, but he played. When he finished, he stared at the keys, afraid to look up. Mrs. Lane's voice came gently. "You have a good ear. You learn by listening, don't you?" Evan nodded silently. "I see," she said. "Well, if you want to perform at the show, I'd be happy to help you prepare. And if you don't want to, we can talk to the office and remove your name from the list. It's your choice." Her voice wasn't pushy. She didn't pressure him. And somehow, that made him feel safer. He didn't answer right away. He just sat there, thinking. He didn't want to be embarrassed. He didn't want to be laughed at again. But a small part of him, a very quiet part, wondered what it would be like if he did perform. If people saw him differently, if he wasn't just the quiet kid in the back. He stood up slowly and said, "I don't know yet." "That's all right," she replied. "You don't have to know today. Come by whenever you want. I'll help you practice, even if it's just for yourself." Evan nodded and walked out of the music room. As he stepped back into the hallway, he heard faint laughter coming from a group of students nearby. They didn't notice him. He could tell they were talking about the talent show. He tightened his grip on the strap of his backpack. A joke. That's all this was to them. But he wasn't sure it had to stay that way as he walked to his next class. He wasn't thinking about disappearing anymore. He wasn't thinking about hiding or avoiding the bulletin board or pretending it never happened. Instead, he kept thinking about the piano and how, for the first time, someone else, and if it was just Mrs. Lane, seemed to believe he had something worth hearing. The rest of the week moved slowly for Evan. Every hour felt heavy, like he was carrying something invisible on his shoulders. The joke about his name on the talent show list hadn't faded. If anything, more students had heard about it. It spread around school the same way rumors always did, fast, loud, and without anyone caring about how the person at the center felt. Every time Evan walked down a hallway, he felt people glance at him. Sometimes they looked curious, sometimes amused, and sometimes just confused. Most of them didn't mean any harm. They were just following whatever the crowd was talking about. But to Evan, every whisper felt like a reminder that he wasn't supposed to be on that list. Still, something had changed since he played those few notes in the music room. He kept hearing Mrs. Lane's voice in his head. The way she had looked at him, not laughing, not pitying him, not confused. She had looked at him like she believed there was something inside him worth paying attention to. That feeling stayed with him longer than he expected. On Wednesday afternoon, after the final bell rang, Evan stood at his locker, staring at his books, pretending to organize them. He wasn't really doing anything important. He was just trying to decide if he should go home or walk back to the music room, like Slane had offered. He wasn't sure why he was hesitating. Maybe he was scared. Maybe he didn't want to get his hopes up. Maybe he didn't want to embarrass himself in front of the one teacher who seemed to believe he wasn't a joke. He took a deep breath and closed his locker. His feet decided, for his mind did. He headed toward the music room. The hallway near the music wing was quieter than the rest of the school. Most students rushed for the exits once the bell rang. Only a few kids hung around for clubs or extra help. When Evan reached the door, he saw that the lights inside were still on. Mrs. Lane looked up from her desk when he stepped in. Her expression softened into a smile that didn't seem forced. "Hello again," she said. "Back for a little practice?" He nodded, though he wasn't sure if practice was the right word. He wasn't confident enough to call it that. Mrs. Lane didn't push him. She simply stood up and walked to the piano, opening the cover so the keys were visible. "Take your time," she said, stepping aside. Evan sat down again, feeling the familiar nerves tightening in his chest. But he also felt something else, a small bit of excitement, the kind that surprised him. He placed his fingers on the keys. His hand shook a little, but no one else was watching except Mrs. Lane. And she wasn't judging him. He played the same small melody he had tried the day before. This time, the notes came out smoother. Not perfect, but steadier. Mrs. Lane listened closely. "You memorize by sound," she said softly again. "Not by reading sheet music." He nodded. "It's a gift, you know," she continued. "Some people train for years and still struggle with that." Evan didn't know what to say. He had never thought of it as a gift. He had just learned music the way it made sense in his head. Mrs. Lane pulled a small notebook from her desk and walked back to the piano. "I'd like to show you something," she said. "Only if you're comfortable." He nodded slowly. She opened the notebook to a page with simple, handwritten notes. It wasn't complicated music, just a slow, soft tune that flowed gently. "I wrote this a few years ago," she explained. "I never performed it. I always hoped one of my students might play it someday. I think you could." The idea startled him. "Me?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "You have a natural touch. You don't hit the keys too hard or too soft. You play like you're trying to say something, even when you're unsure." He felt his face warm. Unsure how to respond, Mrs. Lane set the notebook on the music stand and pointed at the first. "A few notes. How about we try one line at a time?" she said. Evan looked at the notes. He couldn't read them quickly, but he could follow her voice as she hummed the melody gently. He listened carefully, then played the first line. It wasn't perfect. He had to try it twice. But eventually, the melody began to make sense to him. Mrs. Lane nodded with approval. "There," she said. "See, you learn fast. Much faster than you think." They practiced for nearly an hour. Evan didn't even realize how much time had passed until he noticed the sky outside the windows beginning to darken when he finally stepped away from the piano. He was tired, but a good kind of tired. The kind that made him feel like he'd done something meaningful. Mrs. Lane rested a hand on the piano gently. "You know," she said, "if you wanted to play in the talent show, you could. Truly, not because someone put your name down, but because you have something worth sharing." Evan shifted uncomfortably. "But everyone thinks it's a joke." "Then let them think that," she said calmly. "You can't control what they expect, but you can control what you show them." Her words sat with him long after he left the room. When he got home, the house was quiet. His grandmother was in the living room knitting, as she usually did in the evenings. She looked up when he came in and smiled. "You're home later than usual," she said. "I was in the music room," he said, hanging his backpack on a chair. She raised her eyebrows gently. "Practicing?" He nodded. She smiled again, a soft, warm smile that always made him feel safe. "That's good. Music keeps you steady." He joined her on the couch. The small keyboard she had gifted him years ago sat in the corner of the room. It was old and missing one key, but he had learned almost everything he knew on it. Were people kind today? She asked. He hesitated. Some were. Some weren't. She nodded knowingly. That's how people are. Some will understand you. Some won't. Don't let the wrong ones decide what you do. He didn't answer, but he leaned against her shoulder, letting her words settle. That night he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. His mind replayed the notes he had learned. The gentle flow of the tune, the way it had felt to play something he had never tried before. He thought about the talent show list. His name printed in bold letters. The laughter. The whispers. He also thought about Mrs. Lane's belief in him, and his grandmother's soft reassurance. The next day at school, things weren't much different from before. People still whispered. Some students still smirked when they saw him. But something inside Evan had shifted. The joke didn't sting as sharply as it had on the first day. During lunch, he sat alone again, but he didn't feel as lonely. His mind stayed focused on the melody he was learning. When classes ended, he headed straight to the music room again without thinking twice. Mrs. Lane looked pleasantly surprised to see him. Ready for day 2? She asked. He nodded. They sat at the piano and Evan began practicing the next lines of the song. Every time he struggled, she guided him with patience. Every time he improved, she acknowledged it without making him feel pressured, somewhere between the second and third repetition. The door to the music room opened. A kid from the hallway peeked inside. Hey, the kid said. Is Evan practicing for the show? Evan froze. Mrs. Lane answered calmly. He's practicing for himself. The kid nodded and closed the door, leaving them alone again. But Evan's heartbeat took a moment to slow. Mrs. Lane noticed. You don't need to worry, she said gently. Let people wonder. Let them be curious. None of them know what you're capable of yet. He stared at the keys. Do you really think I can do it? He asked quietly, honestly. She said, sitting beside him. Yes, I truly do. Her voice was steady. Certain. Not the kind of voice people used when they were just being polite. Evan took a slow breath. Resting his fingers on the keys again, they practiced every day for the rest of the week. And each day, Evan got a little better. His confidence grew not loudly, not in a way anyone could see but inside. Like a small flame that kept getting stronger at home. He began practicing on the old keyboard again. Even though the missing key made some songs sound uneven, his grandmother listened quietly from her chair, humming along sometimes. One evening she said, I'm proud of you, you know. Not because of a show, because you're finally letting people see what's inside you. Evan smiled softly. He didn't know yet if he would perform at the talent show. The idea still scared him. The crowd, the lights, the whispers, everything about it felt overwhelming. But for the first time, he felt like the choice belonged to him, not the kids who wrote his name down, not the students who laughed, not the jokes that followed him around him. And as he played the soft melody again, his hands steady and sure, he realized something. Maybe the joke hadn't trapped him. Maybe it had opened a door he never would have dared to touch. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't afraid to step through it anymore by the time the next week rolled in. The talent show was all anyone talked about. Posters were taped on the walls, reminders were announced over the speakers, and students chatted loudly about who would perform what. Some practiced dance moves in the hallways, others joked about doing silly acts just to make people laugh. And then there was Evan. The joke about his piano prodigy performance hadn't disappeared. If anything, it had taken a new shape. It wasn't just laughter anymore. Now there was curiosity. Whispers floated around him wherever he went. Do you think he can actually play? Maybe he's pretending to be shy so he can surprise everyone. Nah, he probably doesn't even know the difference between a key and a pedal. Sometimes people laughed when they said those things. Sometimes they sounded serious. But no matter the tone, Evan heard it all. Still, something inside him had changed. The time he spent in the music room with Mrs. Lane was slowly making him feel stronger. Not loud and confident like some kids were, but steady in his own quiet way. Even if the world outside was noisy. Every afternoon, after the last bell, He went straight to the music room. Mrs. Lane was always there, waiting with the same calm smile, like nothing in the world could rush or shake her. She greeted him as if she had been expecting him all day. "Ready to pick up where we left off?" She always asked, and he always nodded. They practiced the soft tune she had written, breaking it into pieces and putting it back together again. Sometimes Evan stumbled. Sometimes he got frustrated and needed a moment to breathe. But Mrs. Lane never made him feel embarrassed. She simply waited, then guided him until the melody returned. After a few days, Evan began to play the song from memory, only glancing at the notebook when he wasn't sure of the next part. His fingers moved more confidently. He pressed the keys with steadier hands. And every time the music filled the room, he felt something warm settle inside his chest. But outside the music room, things weren't as peaceful. One afternoon, as Evan left practice and headed toward the front doors, he ran into a boy from his grade, one of the louder boys, who enjoyed making jokes at other people's expense. The boy stepped right in front of him, blocking his way. "So," the boy said, smirking, "heard you're still practicing for that show?" Evan didn't respond. He lowered his eyes and tried to step around him, but the boy moved again. "What are you going to play?" he asked in a teasing voice. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star?" A couple of other boys nearby snickered. Evan felt his throat tighten. He didn't want trouble. He didn't want to argue. He didn't want to defend himself. He just wanted to go home. He whispered, "Excuse me," and slipped past them. As he walked away, he heard the boy call out, "Can't wait for the comedy show." Their laughter followed him all the way outside. That night at home, Evan sat at the small keyboard in the living room. He played softly so he wouldn't disturb his grandmother. But even as his fingers pressed the keys, his mind kept drifting back to the boy's mocking voice. Comedy show. He tried to shake it off, but the words stuck to him like glue. He wondered if he was making a mistake. Maybe he shouldn't perform. Maybe he wasn't good enough. Maybe all he would do was embarrass himself in front of the whole school. He didn't want that. Not again. Not after everything. His grandmother walked into the room and sat beside him. She listened quietly as he played, humming along. When he stopped, she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You're thinking too loudly," she said. He gave a quiet, confused laugh. "Thinking loudly?" "Yes. I can hear it from across the room." "Something's troubling you," he hesitated. "People at school don't think I can play." Her smile didn't fade. "That's not new. People doubt what they don't see." "But they think I'm going to fail," he whispered. "So what?" she asked softly. "You're not playing for them. You're playing for you." Evan stared at the keyboard. He wanted to believe her. He really did. "Do you want to quit?" she asked gently. "I don't know," he admitted. She nodded. "It's all right not to know. But whatever choice you make sure it's yours. Not because someone laughed. Not because someone doubted you. And not because of fear." Her words echoed in his mind long after he went to bed. The next day, he went to school feeling a mix of nerves and determination. He didn't know what he was going to do yet, but he knew he wasn't ready to give up without thinking carefully. During lunch, while he sat at his usual table, two girls from another class approached him. They weren't laughing. They weren't mocking him. They looked genuinely curious. "Hey," one of them said, "is it true you're performing piano at the talent show?" Evan hesitated. "Maybe." "That's cool," the other girl said with a small smile. "There aren't many piano acts. Most people are doing songs or dances." He didn't know how to respond. He waited for a joke, a smirk, something. But they just nodded politely and walked off. Evan stared down at his food. Could it be that not everyone expected him to fail? Later that afternoon, when he arrived at the music room, Miss Lane was standing beside the piano, organizing some sheet music. "How was your day?" she asked. He shrugged. "Some good. Some not so good. That's how most days are," she said kindly. "Are you ready to play?" Evan sat down at the piano, and they started practicing again. This time, Mrs. Lane had him play the full song from beginning to end. He took a deep breath and began. At first, His nerves made his fingers shake. But as the melody flowed, he relaxed into the music. The notes connected smoothly, forming the gentle tune he had spent days learning. When he reached the final notes, the room felt still. Mrs. Lane didn't clap. She didn't speak right away. She simply smiled, warm, proud. That, she said softly, was beautiful. Evan looked down at his hands. He didn't know what to say. She continued, "You're ready? You may not believe it yet, but you are." "Ready for what?" he asked quietly. "For the show." His chest tightened again. "I'm still scared." "That's normal," she assured him. "Everyone gets scared before something important. Courage doesn't mean not being afraid. It means doing something even when you are." He ran his fingers lightly over the keys. "What if people laugh?" he whispered. "Then let them," she said calmly. "Because when you start playing, they won't be laughing anymore." Her confidence made him feel steady again, but fear still lingered. Before he left, Mrs. Lane handed him the small notebook where the song was written. "Keep it," she said. "Practice at home if you want. And remember, this music is yours now." Evan held the notebook tightly as he walked out of the room. That evening, he practiced at home again. He went over the melody, repeating the parts he struggled with until they felt smooth. His grandmother listened quietly from the couch. Smiling softly, "You sound stronger," she said. "I'm trying," he replied. "That's all that matters." As the talent show drew closer, the tension around school grew too. More people talked about their acts. Teachers reminded students of rehearsal schedules. Posters decorated the hallways, and almost every day, someone mentioned Evan's name. Sometimes it was in a teasing way. Sometimes it was in a curious way. Sometimes it was in a neutral, matter-of-fact way, but it was always there, for Evan. The pressure built like a slow, steady drumbeat. One afternoon, he overheard a group of kids talking near their lockers. "That kid Devin, right? I bet he freezes on stage. No way he actually plays piano. Someone probably signed him up as a prank. It's going to be so awkward." Yvonne's heart pounded. He walked away quickly, pretending he hadn't heard anything. But inside, the fear rose again, after school. When he walked into the music room, Mrs. Lane immediately noticed. Something was off. "You're quieter today," she said gently. He sat on the piano bench, but didn't place his hands on the keys. "Don't think I can do it," he blurted out. Mrs. Lane didn't seem surprised. "Tell me why." Swallowed. "People think I'm going to fail. They're expecting it, and I don't want to embarrass myself." Mrs. Lane sat beside him. "Let me tell you something," she said. "People expect many things, but their expectations don't define you. You get to decide what happens next, not them." Evan stared at the piano keys. "What if I mess up?" He whispered. "Then you mess up," she said simply. "Everyone makes mistakes, but that won't erase your talent or your effort." He didn't respond. She continued gently, "Evan, you've worked hard. You've grown. You've learned something new every day. You're not the same boy who walked into this room the first time. You're stronger now." Her words settled around him like a warm blanket. She added, "And even if you decide not to perform, I want you to remember something important. Your music has value. You have value." Took a slow breath. He didn't feel fully ready. Maybe he wouldn't feel ready until the moment he stepped on stage. But deep down, something inside him was beginning to shift. He placed his hands on the piano again. "Can we practice the beginning one more time?" he asked quietly. Mrs. Lane smiled. Of course. They practiced long after most students had gone home, as Evan walked out of the school that evening. The sky was painted in soft orange and pink colors. He held the notebook close to his chest. He still wasn't sure what would happen at the talent show, but for the first time, the idea of performing didn't feel impossible. It felt like something he might be able to face, something he might even rise above, and somewhere inside him, a small voice whispered, "Maybe this won't be a joke after all." The evening of the talent show arrived much faster than anyone expected, especially for the quiet boy who had spent the last few weeks letting music shape every part of his day. The school was glowing with excitement. Bright banners hung along the hallways, and students rushed from one place to another, laughing, talking, and adjusting their clothes as they prepared for their moments on stage. It was the biggest night of the year. Everyone felt it. But inside the small backstage room, he didn't feel that excitement. All he felt was the weight in his chest, pressing down harder with every passing minute. He tried to breathe slowly, but each breath felt shallow, like the air didn't want to stay inside him for long. His palms were sweaty, and his fingers, usually full of life when touching piano keys, now trembled even when they rested in his lap. The muffled sound of the crowd filtered through the wall. The noise only made his heart beat faster. He kept imagining the worst. People laughing the moment he walked out, someone shouting something cruel, or his fingers freezing on the keys. The more he tried not to think about it, the more those thoughts crowded his mind. He looked down at his clothes. His grandmother had ironed his shirt earlier that day, making sure it had no wrinkles. She said it would help him feel confident, like someone ready to show the world what he carried inside. But even that didn't stop the fear that crawled up his spine. He wasn't alone backstage. Other students waited for their turns as well, some pacing, some humming to warm up their voices, some checking their props. A few glanced at him but quickly looked away again. Most probably didn't expect anything from him. They still thought he was the boy who had been signed up as a joke. One student, a tall boy with messy hair who was preparing a comedy act, stepped over to him. He wasn't a close friend, but he wasn't unkind either. He carried an upbeat energy that filled any space he walked into. "You look nervous," the boy said with a small smile. He nodded slowly, not bothering to hide it. "Don't worry too much," the boy continued. "Everyone gets nervous before going out there. Even me, and I'm literally going out to make a fool of myself on purpose." He laughed lightly, trying to ease the tension. The quiet boy tried to smile, even though it felt forced. "Thanks," he said softly. The other boy patted his shoulder. "Hey, even if you're not confident, just play like you're alone in a room. Pretend no one's out there. Works for me." Then he headed back to his corner, leaving the quiet boy with a bit more courage than before. Still, the fear stayed. A moment later, the backstage door opened, and the music teacher walked in. She scanned the room until her eyes landed on him. She came over quickly, kneeling in front of him so she could look directly at him. "Are you ready?" she asked gently. He opened his mouth, but couldn't find words. His throat felt tight. The teacher didn't pressure him. Instead, she placed a hand on his shoulder, the same way a parent might when trying to calm a frightened child. "You have something special," she said softly. "And I know tonight feels heavy. But you don't have to impress anyone. Just share what you've been holding inside. Let them feel what you feel when you play. That's all you need to do." He looked at her, and even though the fear was still there, her words gave him something to hold on to. Not courage exactly, but a reminder that the music inside him was real, more real than the jokes. More real than the whispers, more real than the fear. The teacher squeezed his shoulder gently. "I'll be right in the front row. Just look at me if you need to." Then she stood and walked back toward the stage entrance. The crowd outside grew louder. The show had already started, and the host's voice echoed faintly through the hall. One act finished, applause followed, then another performer took the stage. Minutes slipped by. Each act brought him closer to his own turn. He closed his eyes. He tried to remember the first time he played a real piano in the music room. The smoothness of the keys, the way sound filled the space around him, the surprising comfort he felt, as if the instrument knew all his fears and gently pushed them aside. That memory helped him breathe a little easier. Then he imagined his grandmother sitting at home earlier that evening. She had hugged him tightly before he left, telling him he didn't need to be great. He just needed to be honest with his music. She said the truth inside his hands mattered more than perfection. His eyes opened slowly. Someone backstage called his name. His heart jumped. A sudden shock ran through him, making his legs feel unsteady. But he stood. Slowly, carefully, like someone learning to walk on a tightrope. The hallway leading to the stage was dim, lit only by a few small lights. As he walked toward the entrance, he could hear the audience settling down again after the last performance. There were whispers, small laughs, the sound of someone unwrapping candy. A few chairs scraping the floor. Then the host spoke his name into the microphone. The host's tone carried mild curiosity, almost as if he didn't know what to expect. "We have a piano performance." There was no excitement in the crowd, only mild chatter. He stepped out. The lights hit him instantly, bright and warm. For a moment, he couldn't see anything except white shapes. Then his vision adjusted, revealing rows of faces. Some looked bored, some amused, some simply waiting. A few students leaned forward with smirks, expecting something entertaining in the wrong way. His legs trembled again. For a second, he thought he might run back off stage. But then he saw the teacher sitting in the front row. She wasn't smiling in a forced way. She simply watched him with steady, calm eyes, as if she believed he could do this. He took a slow breath. The piano sat at the center of the stage, looking larger than ever. He approached it, each step feeling heavier than the one before. When he finally sat down, his hands hovered above the keys. The crowd grew quiet. His fingers shook. He pressed them against the cool surface of the keys, trying to steady himself. He closed his eyes in that small moment of darkness, heard the melody he planned to play gentle at first, then growing stronger. He let the sound fill his mind. He imagined the notes gliding like water, smooth and calm. He opened his eyes again, and then he began to play. The first few notes came softly, almost fragile, like they were unsure whether they belonged in the silence of the room. But he kept going. His fingers moved slowly at first, searching for confidence. Then something shifted. The music began to flow, weaving itself through the air. His hands moved more freely, the melody taking shape with each stroke of the keys. The tremble in his fingers faded. His breath steadied. The fear didn't vanish completely, but it became small enough for the music to push aside. The room grew still. No whispers. No laughter. Just the rising sound of the piano. He felt the familiar warmth in his chest, the same feeling he had every time he played alone. The notes carried his emotions, the quiet sadness he never spoke about, the hope he kept hidden, the strength he didn't know he had. People in the audience exchanged surprised glances. Even those who came expecting a joke now leaned forward, their expressions changing. The melody grew stronger, fuller. His hands moved with confidence, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, shaping the music exactly how he felt it. The teacher watched with bright eyes, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Halfway through the piece, something magical happened inside him. For the first time that night, he didn't feel like he was performing. He didn't feel like a joke, or a mistake, or someone forced into something he wasn't ready for. He felt free. The audience disappeared. The stage disappeared. Everything faded except the sound of the piano and the feeling inside him by the time he reached the last part of the piece. His heart wasn't heavy anymore. The music lifted it, carrying it gently to a place that felt safe. He ended with a delicate note that lingered in the air. For a moment, just one small moment, the room remained silent. Then applause burst through the auditorium. It wasn't hesitant or confused. It was loud, full, and real. Some people stood. Some cheered. Even students who had laughed earlier now wore stunned expressions. He looked up, breathing hard, his hands still resting on the keys. His eyes scanned the room, unsure how to process what was happening. The teacher stood too, clapping with a proud smile. He sat there, still overwhelmed, unsure whether to smile or cry or just sit in disbelief. All he knew was that for the first time in his life, felt seen, and not because of a joke, but because of the music that had always been waiting inside him, ready for the world to hear. The applause from the performance still echoed in his ears long after he walked off the stage. It followed him like a warm shadow, something gentle that stayed close, even as the backstage lights dimmed behind him. His heart was still beating fast, but now it wasn't from fear. It was from something brighter, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Backstage, a few students looked at him with wide eyes. Some gave small nods. Some smiled awkwardly, unsure of what to say after witnessing something they clearly hadn't expected. A few were too surprised to react at all. He wasn't used to attention, so every stare felt strange. but none of them felt mocking. None of them felt sharp like the ones he used to get in the hallway. Instead, these eyes carried something soft or respect, maybe, or curiosity. The music teacher came rushing toward him, her expression full of emotion. "You were wonderful," she said, her voice warm and a little shaky, as if she had been holding her breath the entire time he was on stage. He didn't know what to say. Words felt too small. All he could manage was a quiet "thank you." She placed both hands on his shoulders. "I hope you understand now," she said gently. "This is who you really are. Not the shy boy who hides in the back of the room. Not the kid people think they can joke about. You showed everyone tonight what you carry inside you, and they saw it." He looked down, but she lifted his chin lightly so he would meet her eyes. "Be proud," she whispered. "You earned it." A few minutes later, the host called the next performer, and applause rose again. The show moved on, but he stayed backstage for a moment, letting everything settle inside him. He took a deep breath and walked toward the hallway leading out of the auditorium. The air outside felt cooler, calmer. The faint sound of music from the stage drifted through the door. But even that felt distant now. He spotted his grandmother near the entrance. She had made her way to the school with careful, slow steps, determined not to miss his performance. She stood leaning slightly on her cane, her eyes shining when she saw him. She opened her arms wide and he hurried into them. Her embrace wrapped around him like the safest blanket in the world. "My boy," she whispered softly. "You've played with your whole heart. I felt every note." He held her tighter. "I was so scared," he murmured. She chuckled warmly. "Everyone is scared when they do something that matters. But you didn't let fear win." She leaned back to look at him. "I am proud of you. More than you know." Her words made his eyes sting, but he blinked them away. This moment felt too precious to blur. As they walked out of the hallway, a few students passed by, offering small congratulations. One of them, someone who had usually ignored him, gave him a thumbs up. Another simply said, "That was awesome." He nodded shyly, not knowing how to respond to compliments. But then, from a few feet away, he saw someone approaching slowly. It was the boy who often joked at his expense. The same one who had taken part in the prank that signed him up for the talent show. The boy stopped in front of him, shifting awkwardly. He looked uncomfortable, almost embarrassed. "Hey," the boy muttered. I just wanted to say, that was actually really good. Like, really good." The quiet boy didn't answer right away. He didn't know what to say. The memory of the prank still stung, even after everything that had happened. The other boy seemed to notice the hesitation. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, I know what we did before wasn't nice. I didn't think you'd actually go up there and play, but you proved everyone wrong tonight. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was honest. And it was more than the quiet boy ever expected to hear." He nodded gently. "Thanks," he said softly. The boy gave a small nod back before walking away, relief visible in the way his shoulders relaxed. As they continued walking, his grandmother leaned close and whispered, "Sometimes people don't know what someone can do until they see it with their own eyes. Tonight, they saw you." The quiet boy smiled a little. The next day at school, everything felt different. He wasn't sure what he expected, but he definitely didn't expect the hallway to become so silent when he stepped inside. Students turned to look at him not with judgment or laughter, but with a kind of surprise that had softened into something encouraging. A few nodded at him. Some smiled. A couple even clapped lightly when he walked past. He felt his face warm, not from embarrassment, but from disbelief. The teacher saw him in the hallway and waved him over. "I spoke with the school principal this morning," she said. "They want you to play at the school assembly next month. And there's more." She pulled out a folder from her bag. He blinked up at her. "More?" "There's a local music program that offers scholarships to young musicians," she explained. "I think you'd be perfect for it. I'd like to help you apply if you're willing." His heart skipped. "But I've never taken real lessons." "Doesn't matter," she said firmly. "What you have is talent and heart. Lessons can shape skills, but no one can teach the pure feeling you put into your music." He held the folder carefully, almost afraid it might disappear if he didn't grip it tightly enough. "Think about it," she added with a warm smile. "This could open doors for you." He nodded slowly. "I'll try," he said. That's all I wanted to hear. At lunch, he sat at his usual table, but for the first time, he didn't feel invisible. A few classmates walked past and said they liked his performance. Someone asked him what song he played. Another asked if he could teach them the basics someday. He wasn't used to being noticed, and the attention made him feel shy. But there was also a strange warmth spreading through him, something that made the world seem a little less heavy when school ended. He walked home with the folder tucked safely in his backpack. His grandmother waited on the porch, just like she always did. But today, her smile was even brighter. "How was your day?" she asked. "Different," he said with a small laugh. She nodded knowingly. "Good. Different, I hope." "Yeah," he replied. "Good, different." That evening, he sat at his old keyboard, the same one he'd been practicing on for years. The keys were worn, the sound wasn't perfect, but it felt like home. He took out the scholarship papers and placed them beside him. Then he rested his hands on the keys and played softly. Not to practice, not to prepare for anything, just to feel the music. As he played, his grandmother sat in her favorite chair, listening quietly. The house filled with gentle notes, drifting through the small living room and out the open window. After a few minutes, she spoke. "Do you know what the miracle was?" she asked. He paused mid-song and looked at her. She smiled. "The miracle wasn't that you played well. It wasn't even the applause. The real miracle was that a joke became the bridge that led you to this moment. It pushed you into the light where you could finally show the world what you've kept hidden." He didn't answer right away, but he understood. He looked down at the keyboard. The same instrument that once felt like a secret now felt like a promise. He pressed a soft chord, letting it linger. "I think," he said quietly. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." Grandmother smiled. "And whatever comes next," she replied, "you won't face it alone." The quiet boy nodded. The fear that once followed him everywhere felt lighter now. Not gone completely, but no longer in control. Outside, the evening sky turned orange and pink. The world seemed bigger, brighter, filled with possibilities he had never dared to consider. He played again, this time with steady hands, not for the school, not for the crowd, not even for the memory of that night. He played for himself, and for the first time. He believed, truly believed, that the music he carried inside could take him somewhere. A joke had brought him to the stage. But the miracle was what happened afterward, and his story was just beginning.